So let's talk about the changes in aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay, so we've got our chart here, we've got price level on the y-axis, we've got our real GDP on the x-axis. Let's draw in our curves. We have our downward sloping aggregate demand curve going from left to right, representing realistically what our GDP is for the country. We know our GDP is consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports, which gives us our aggregate demand curve. We also have our short run aggregate supply curve, which is an upward sloping curve that shows us what our supply is at in the short run. These two meet at equilibrium, where we'll also find our long run aggregate supply, which is at full employment at GDP to give us our macro equilibrium. At that point, we have our output as Y. We also have our price level at equilibrium here as well. Now we know that any changes to GDP are going to result in a change in our aggregate demand curve one way or the other. So let's assume for a moment we have an increase in consumer spending. We'll have a rightward shift in our aggregate demand curve, which will establish a new equilibrium with our short run aggregate supply curve here. Now, we also know that in the long run, our aggregate supply curve is going to shift to meet this change. With increase in price level means an increase in wages, increase in resource costs means we're going to see a decrease in aggregate supply. So our aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left, establishing our new long run equilibrium at the curve point here. So our new equilibrium exists at this point where we're at the same output, however we see an increase in price level in the long run.